Hey guys, so I mentioned in yesterday's video that I thought using a query component from React Apollo would simplify things as opposed to what we did where we created the higher order component using the with view listing here, and then we had to end up creating another component called view wrapper, which we use kind of just intermediate to be able to get everything to work. So in today's video, I thought it'd be helpful if I showed you how I would actually go about refactoring this component to use the query component. So what we're going to do is that, and I'm going to start by importing it from React Apollo. And so instead of exporting a higher order component, we're going to just be exporting a component. And it's going to be actually kind of similar to what the view wrapper is. So I'm going to copy this because we're going to be using the props here. And we're going to paste it in just below. So I'm going to export this component. I'm going to call it view listing. So now this component, how it's going to work is it's going to take in a listing ID as a prop, which is going to be a string, and then it's going to have children, which it passes the data. And now I no longer am going to receive that data through the props, at least through this component. So now I'm going to use that listing ID here. So now instead of rendering the children right here, what I'm going to do is use the query component. And now the query component is going to have a function in the middle. I'm going to just return null for now. And we're going to pass in our query, use the same one, view listing query. And I'm going to pass in the types. So the types are view listing query with a capital V, and then also variables. All right, and then we also can pass in the variable, and we can pass it through the variable's prop. And now ours is called ID, so I'm going to say ID here, and we're going to pass in the listing ID that the user passes, or whoever's using this component passes in. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to move the props logic that we have right here and put it right here. So this is going to be data here, and this is going to be loading. So now I can just copy what we do right here. Now the only difference is I don't have to worry about looking at loading. Loading is always going to be here. So I'm just going to pass loading directly in here. The only thing I need to grab is the listing. The listing is going to work pretty much the same way though, except I don't need to care about this. So I'm going to set the listing if there is a listing. So here I'm checking if we have data, and if we have data.viewListing, if they have those, we're going to go ahead and set it. Basically the same logic as we had before. All right, so here we're returning now an object, and we don't want to return object. We want to return children. Oops. Children. And now those children are going to have a listing and a loading they can access. And that's exactly what we specified here with the children data with view listing. And yeah, that's pretty much all we need to do. I think we're good to try this out now. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this. Give that a save and delete that. So everything else we can keep. We can keep the query itself. We can keep these props here because that's what I'm going to be passing down. But now I don't actually really need to export these because the person who calls this component is not going to need to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and build this. So I'm going to say yarn build. And then we need to go change how we're using this on the website. So let's do that. So now I no longer need this view wrapper at all. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. And now, let's see, view listing. We don't want to be in the controller. We want to do view listing over here, the connector. All right, so now I'm going to, I pretty much can just change out the names here. So we're going to be getting this from the controller. Controller, and it's going to be view listing. So I'm going to render view listing here, And now we're going to pass in the listing ID. And now the data here, I actually don't need to say any. I know the exact type of it. We can hover over it and we can see that. And if I do data dot, you can see I get auto completion and I can see the two values. So I have loading, and that's Boolean. We have a listing that's either null or it's actually a listing value. So let's see this on our actual website. If I come over here and I click this, we can see I am a house and I am an apartment as well. So same functionality, but in my opinion, this is a much simpler way to do it. We eliminated a whole component, or at least the two different places we are adding it now. So this is kind of how I ended up doing it. So if it's easier to add a higher order component, I'll add a higher order component. If it's easier to use the query component, I'll just use the query component. So whatever seems to be the easiest for what I'm doing. But I hope that was helpful, and you can kind of see what the same code would look like using a higher order component versus using the query component from React Apollo.